Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Royal Blue Podcast. I'm Phil Kirkbride, and today joined at various places across Merseyside by Adam Jones, Sam Carroll, and Chris Beesley, as we endeavour to bring you Royal Blue Podcast as usual, despite working from home, and as I say, at various points across the region. Hope everybody listening is well, fit and healthy, and following government advice, as we hope to see the back of this as soon as possible. And it is coronavirus on the agenda, of course. How could it not be today? So we'll look at the two dates that are doing the rounds at the moment, as football tries to look for a way back. April the 30th is the latest extension to suspension of Premier League games, and June the 30th is the date given by UEFA this week for when they hope there will be a resolution to all domestic leagues. We'll discuss whether that's ambitious or realistic or not realistic. Let's see. And also, in point of interest this week, former director of football Steve Walsh is back in the game, but possibly in one of the most unlikely destinations. He's gone to Charlotte in America to be part of their MLS setup there, and we'll talk about his legacy and an article that many of you have read on our website this week. All of his signings rated, so I'll ask the panel to give us their thoughts on his best and worst signing in his near 2-year reign at Goodison. But chaps, we'll start with obviously the only news story this week, last week, and for weeks to come. The Premier League this week, Adam, after the meeting, extended the suspension of football until April the 30th, was from the 3rd of April. How realistic do you think that we will see football again on the 1st of May?
It seems unlikely at this stage, doesn't it? It only seems like the situation across the country is getting worse at this point, and the fact that we're doing this podcast in the way that we're doing it just only goes to show that really there's self-isolation going on in all walks of life, and football's no different. And it just seems hard for me to think. I think April the 3rd was certainly very unlikely as a date for them to come back, and I just can't see how much the situation's going to change by the time April the 30th comes around. But you wonder, if we get to April the 30th and maybe they have to extend the deadline again, you just wonder where the cut-off point is going to be, because you've still got a large amount of fixtures to fit in. You've got FA Cup fixtures to try and fit in, European fixtures to try and fit in as well for certain teams across the country. So it's going to be a real tough situation for the Premier League to try and deal with. And even players coming back, are they going to need some sort of almost pre-season friendlies to try and get themselves fit again? Having spent so much time at home, as we know, the Everton squad are on individual training plans at the minute. How much is that going to be effective? You just can't tell. So there's still so many questions, I think, that need to be answered, and only time will tell what the solutions to that are going to be.
Chris, the FA, of course, changing the rules of their sort of constitution, if you like, where they define a season has to be finished by June the 1st, and saying that extension is now sort of indefinite. Do you think that UEFA's desired finish for domestic leagues to be over by June the 30th? Do you actually think there's going to be a situation where it's very realistic that we'll see football played into July?
I think that's Phil. I think that's a realistic possibility, given that we've already seen this one delay of almost a month after the original return date. And with that, of course, brings the whole issues of contracts, because contracts typically run until the end of June. So you've got loan players like Djibril Sidibe, players who are coming to the end of their contract, they might not figure so much as Sidibe does, of Oumar Niasse and Cuco Martino be out of contract. But I imagine if it does come to that, there's going to have to be agreements across the board that in the extenuating circumstances, players are allowed to stay with the clubs they're at now. But it is a major issue that needs to be addressed, and I can imagine, I think there's probably a fair chance of that happening now in the season, actually going beyond June, never mind May, like you say.
And of course, Sam, yesterday, Prime Minister Boris Johnson talking about a 12-week period when he hoped the country could turn the tide on the coronavirus. But of course, that doesn't mean, far from it, in fact, that everybody can suddenly come out of out of hibernation and out of lockdown and self-isolation and everything goes back to normal. And I think perhaps we have to be very mindful of the fact that if the Premier League and football around the country is to pick up, is much of it going to have to be played behind closed doors? And if so, what do you think of that?
Yeah, obviously you don't want to see a situation where it does get played behind closed doors. But if it has to come to that to finish the season, then ultimately that's got to happen, hasn't it? You know, the season has got to finish somewhere, and we need to resolve. You know, obviously Liverpool will win the league, but then who finishes in the European place? Obviously, we've got an outside chance of that. That needs to be resolved, and the relegation places and the promotion places, with all the money involved at the moment, just means it does need to end. So, as much as every football fan doesn't want that to happen, and as much as, you know, professional footballers are used to playing in front of massive Premier League crowds, then if the FA think that is the only way to get it done, then that's going to be what's going to have to happen. And at the moment, that's probably looking the most likely scenario, which is, you know, this is unprecedented. But even, you know, going back to the old school days of, you know, finding out the score at the end of the game, or keeping up, you know, with real time updates and not being able to watch the game would just be so strange, wouldn't
it? Did any of us on this podcast today think that there was any realistic possibility, or think there was any value at all? As some have said, and some have said this with obviously a vested interest, but others have said it from a position where they don't have an interest in that respect, that the season should have just been cancelled, voided, or there should have been a position where we took the table as it was, and some of the boffins in the Premier League offices worked out a points ratio and said, right, this is how the season's finishing.
I remember there was actually yesterday, I did a story on this, using it's the system which FIFA apparently used for their world rankings, and this professor had devised
the boffin I was talking about.
The aforementioned boffins, and he totted up all the results based on this complex formula of different permutations, how many games you played, how many home games you'd remaining, and did all the number crunching, and every single one of the 20 Premier League teams remained in the same position where they are now. But we could say, well, Everton are probably the ones least affected because they're not actually doing anything. They've not got relegation issues, not got title issues. But that would actually mean that Everton stayed in 12th place, and that would have been Everton's lowest league position since 2004, 16 years ago. Wow. And I'm sure Evertonians wouldn't be happy with finishing Ancelotti's first season with the lowest league position for 16 years. They've just come through a tough run where they've had Arsenal, Manchester United, Chelsea, and I imagine Everton would be expecting to pick up quite a few more points before the end of the season. I think it actually had them finishing 6 points below where they finished last season. Wow. So, it was intrinsically unfair anyway to do that. That's why we love football anyway, because of the unpredictability and the numerous permutations that can happen on any given day to change the result. So, yeah, I thought it was ridiculous. I think 3/4 of the season gone. You've got to finish that season.
I think
go on, Sam. Go on.
As an Everton fan, you know, that obviously it's funny, isn't it, to say, oh, cancel the season, and for Liverpool to not win the league. And I wouldn't personally mind it, but it'd be unfair, wouldn't it? That, you know, Liverpool have had a great season, and an unprecedented season in the amount of matches they won. But the big thing for me is obviously promotion, relegation, Europe. You know, you've got Sheffield United up there, you've got Wolves up there. You know, with a bit of better form last few months we would have had ourselves, and the money that you get from playing in the Premier League, that all three teams in the bottom three can realistically set up. There's no one adrift. You know, there's all to play for, and then the teams in the Championship as well. You know, it could really, really impact some teams' long-term future. You know, I'm sure, you know, Jurgen Klopp isn't sitting there thinking, I really want to win the league for this windfall we'll get, but there's teams in the Championship who are probably going to be dependent on getting promoted this season. So the season has to finish, doesn't it? You can't just wipe off a 29, 30 game season and say, well, we'll come back and we'll start again next year. That can't happen. So such a strange position, but that is right now the big thing, isn't it? How do we finish it? How do we finish it safely? And how do we finish it in the best way that it doesn't impact upon anything else? You know, obviously it's been a a good decision taken early to postpone the Euro. But then even that next summer will throw up its own challenges. So, what a time we are kind of witnessing at the moment.
And I know, just going back to Beesley's point about, Everton would have finished 12th in this if this scientists' FIFA coefficient plan data model had been slapped on the Premier League at this point. And look, as he rightly says, we have no fear of relegation. We're not going for the title, but we are going for Europe. But also, every league position, Adam, counts for more money. And we again have seen from the accounts that were shown in January how important every 2 million is to the club and ultimately to the amount of money we can spend on improving the squad.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was, that was very clear in January when we had that general meeting, and I think it's only heightened in importance with this current situation. With the situation as it currently stands, you find it hard to think that any football club is gonna keep the same amount of money. I think every football club across the country is going to lose money in some way, shape, or form by these matches at least getting postponed. And then, who knows what's going to happen in the future? Who knows how long they're going to get postponed for? And at the bottom sort of levels of the football pyramids, that could be massive for these clubs. For like certain League Two, even League One clubs to be losing these sort of gate receipts and stuff like that for the next 2 months at least. The foreseeable future, let's say, that could be hugely impactful on them, staying in business, which is, it kind of puts it into stark perspective. I've got no doubt that Premier League clubs will lose money as well, but, Premier League clubs are kind of safe from a lot of that, really, because of the amount of TV money that we've got. But then you wonder what the TV companies are going to do without being able to stream matches and so forth. So, yeah, I just think the financial situation becomes all the more important. And it just goes back to what the lads said. I completely agree that I think the priority should be finishing the season. Now, as a last resort, I would probably do it behind closed doors if there's no other way of doing it. But I would prioritise finishing this season before we start thinking about, let's just rip it up and start next season, push next season back if we need to. I think there's an argument to be said. If we push next season back, it might actually play into our hands for when the Winter World Cup comes around. We might be able to structure the seasons a little bit better, and it might, in the long term, produce a little bit less of a headache when that Winter World Cup comes around. But
and extend the season going forward into more of the summer months. Do you mean?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, just try and structure the next couple of years a little bit differently. If it means that we don't see football this season for even beyond May, June, let's say, so be it. I think the priority, regardless, should just be finish this season and then take stock and see where we go from there.
Bees, just going back to the idea of behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Every club would probably argue this, but it feels particularly pertinent to us. It may be the only solution in order to get the Premier League finished within the timeframes desired. But we as a club would have a particular sort of issue with that, wouldn't we? Because we'd play the derby behind closed doors, games with Leicester, big games, and we all know, and I know, as I say, other clubs rightly will say that their homes are their fortresses, etc., etc. But there's an acceptance that Goodison, and when the crowd's behind the team, is a very, very difficult place to play, and it's a huge part of what every manager at Everton tries to harness. And Carlo has certainly already spoken about it. So there would be reasons for disappointment at Everton if the decision was made that there'd be no fans allowed in the grounds for the remaining matches.
Yeah, like you say, I mean, every team is going to want their home support, that partisanship behind them, and just the fact that obviously the people have paid the money to go to the matches. But yeah, that Everton in particular, I mean, many managers, referees have said over the years, Alex Ferguson, of course, I think Howard Webb as well amongst the referees, just what a difficult arena that is to come to as an away team or as a referee to officiate in. Like you say, we've got the prospect of a Merseyside derby to fit in before the end of the season. That I'm sure there is much more chance of Everton getting a result in a derby if it's a passionate full house at Goodison Park rather than what is essentially a glorified training session in an empty stadium. So, yeah, as Adam says, the most important thing is fulfilling the fixtures for me, to get those fixtures played. and if need be, that has to go behind closed doors. But that is a last resort. I'd rather wait a little bit longer and actually play the games when the fans can go into the stadium.
Sam, just on waiting a bit longer and giving everything its due time and as much time as possible. Sean Harvey, the former EFL chief exec, I think, was on Sky Sports earlier this week and having a discussion about what could happen. And he even floated the idea, and it was just a suggestion, that the next season, 2020-2021, actually is reduced and begins in January and is a 19-game season. And it's just the luck of the draw whether you have 10 games at home and 9 away. I mean, would that work?
Like T20, isn't it? T20 football. Little shootout.
Yeah.
I'd say just now, with the amount of money that's involved in football, it couldn't be, could it? Do you know, it's fun, it's quirky. It would be something different. It'd be crazy, and it'd certainly be exciting. But the amount of money that rests on these seasons now, and you're talking, you know, life and death for clubs, aren't you? Whether clubs continue, whether clubs can continue to compete and punch their weight. So it's not going to happen. And you know, but it does raise the question of where does it kind of stop? Just because, you know, if this season runs over, then the next season runs over, and like could it change football forever? Could we never manage to, unless we said, right, we're going to finish this season in mid-August and then start the next season a couple of weeks after, and everyone just has to kind of grin and bear it? You know, there's got to be some kind of...
There's got to be some give somewhere, hasn't there?
There's got to be give somewhere. You know, with an international tournament being pulled, with a cup competition being pulled, with multiple cup competitions getting pulled. So, you know, it really is, for me personally, I think it's the first time in my lifetime where I'm living a monumental footballing kind of time, in terms of, you know, it's worldwide. It's across, I think, pretty much every league bar the Turkish league at the moment. You know, it's a massive time for football, and you know, a massive time for the governing bodies to step up and find a solution that suits everyone. But, you know, as the saying goes, you won't please everyone, and they certainly won't please everyone this time. There's going to be some people who won't be happy with what they do. There's going to be some people who are delighted, and some people who are just a bit... Yeah, as B says, it doesn't really affect Everton at this moment, does it? But it is still, you know, usually sometimes think as football fans we can get a bit of thingy to, you know, if it's not affecting us, we're not really bothered. But this, I think, has got the interest of all fans at the moment to see how they're going to kind of deal with that. So yeah, I wouldn't be. I'd be up for a 19-game shootout season in you know, just to see what happened. But it would never.
I don't know about that. I mean, what if you got relegated? I mean, hopefully, won't happen under Carlo Ancelotti. But you know, Everton were in the relegation zone back in December, coming up to the halfway point of the season. So, what do you do with the teams who could you get relegated off a 19-game season of all kinds of permutations? I suppose we've only got less than a quarter of the season to complete. I think, however long you've got to wait for that to get resumed, you could chuck a few midweeks in. You get that done in about 6 weeks, surely. So, yeah, I don't think we're going to have this doomsday scenario where it's going to take us years and years to play catch up. And as Adam said, there might even be a bit of jiggery pokery to do ahead of the Winter World Cup, which in itself has thrown up massive issues for the traditional football calendar.
Well, and of course, Adam, as well, we have to, you know, it would seem fairly sensible to suggest, even at this stage, that whatever happens, pre-season won't look the same this summer. You know, pre-season, you know, last summer Everton going to Kenya, Switzerland, Germany a couple of times, etc. You know, it lasts, 6 weeks before the competitive stuff starts. And I know there's obviously guidelines and advice over players having a certain amount of rest, but in terms of talking about things having to give, is that kind of where maybe the sort of it will tell on you know, there has to be some negotiation there. I know that's not ideal because players do need rest, and that comes for a very good reason. And you know, we could be talking in 6-8 months' time about players getting injured earlier on in the season and stuff. But is that the place where this maybe has to give? I don't know.
I think I completely agree, to be honest. Yeah, and I think we'll probably know a little bit more than that about it. You know, when we come towards this, you know, 30th of April deadline, I think, when we're a couple of weeks away from that, I think we'll know a little bit better whether we'll actually be seeing football after that deadline, whether it'll need to be extended, so on and so forth. And to be honest, you'd think that perhaps the players wouldn't want to, come back. Let's say they do come back on May the 1st, let's say, and we all play. And as B says, they could get it done in 6 weeks. So let's just say they get it done in 6 weeks. Would the players really want to do it for 6 weeks and then have another long period of time off? I'm not so sure. When a lot of them would have been playing international football, of course, which has now been suspended. Copa America's been suspended. Euros have been suspended. So these players would have been preparing to play a little bit of football over the summer at least. So perhaps maybe give them another 2-3 weeks off, maybe completely focused on rest, and perhaps just have a little short pre-season schedule. Maybe just have a domestic sort of pre-season where we'd see Everton travel to Scotland or whatever, let's say, or a few lower league clubs in England to just try and get minutes in the legs again, and then just go from there. I think pre-season's probably, it seems to me like the ideal time to just take a bit of time back and then refocus and get straight back into it.
Obviously, it's closer to. Sorry, Phil. Obviously, it's closer to my heart doing the non-league stuff as well. But I did see the Northwest Counties chairman tweet yesterday saying, obviously, as Adam wrote in one of his pieces yesterday, under 23 footballers off as well. And I think it'd be nice, maybe, that they're going to need some kind of mini pre-season after this. It might not necessarily have to be the first team, but it's a really tough time. I think Barnet this week have laid off their entire staff, to cope. And we have so many non-league teams across Liverpool and the local areas that, it'd be nice to see Everton and Liverpool and Tranmere maybe try and organise some matches with, your Little and Remicas, your Prescott Cables and all local teams to try and give them a bit of a match day boost, because, Everton and Liverpool are, in quotation marks, the lucky ones, because missing a few months of football, although it will impact them in the long term, they'll still make that money back on matches. But this could really be going months without fans coming through the gate of non-league could be horribly, could be the death of some of them. So it'd be nice to see. We know Everton are brilliant at the community stuff, but it'd be really nice to see them reach out in that respect, either in this mini pre-season if they granted that, or in the summer as part of the pre-season schedule.
We have seen this week the EFL announce financial support packages for clubs in the Football League pyramid and stuff. But Sam makes a good point about teams in our locality, and look, Premier League clubs will obviously lose out some money, if games played behind closed doors, etc. Look, and we know that how sort of not perilous, but of course how difficult some clubs have financial positions with FFP and trying to remain sort of balance the books, if you like. But is there not enough money sloshing around the Premier League for a fund to be created generally to help these clubs? I mean, I know somebody made a good point online, I think it was today or yesterday, that if the football clubs can find £5 million to give Richard Scudamore a sort of a golden handshake and a payoff recently, surely there could be that sort of money can be found to help these other clubs survive.
You'd like to think so, wouldn't you? Because these are people's livelihoods at the end of the day. It's not just you'll have, let's say, a few non-league, even League Two clubs go under because of this situation. You're going to have so many players who are looking for new clubs. You're going to have so many casual staff who are looking for new jobs. It affects so many people's lives. People in that local area have suddenly lost what could have been major part of their income on match days, and it does just affect so many people's lives. And as you say, the Premier League do have a lot of money to be playing about with. The TV deals are just getting astronomically and exponentially more and more every single year. You'd like to think a fair wedge of that could be put aside to make sure every single football team in the pyramid is safe over this period of uncertainty for everybody.
Okay, we'll move on. Sam wrote a piece earlier this week rating every one of Steve Walsh signings. He was given an enviable task of putting that together, but it's definitely been an article of interest. Obviously, it was on the back of, as we mentioned at the top of the podcast, Steve Walsh is back in football finally after He was sacked by Everton in the summer of 2018. So I'm going to ask the panel today to give me their favourite or the player they consider the best signing of the Steve Walsh era and the signing they consider the worst. Bees, you're looking most worried, so I'm going to come to you first. Who do you think Steve Walsh deserves credit for bringing to the football club?
I was just thinking about this earlier, and it's been a slow burner. Dominic Calvert-Lewin, he was a Steve Walsh signing, wasn't he?
He was in the Steve Walsh era, yeah, of course, yeah.
Definitely, he'd be one if he would come to us a year ago. The jury would really be out on him. A player who's improved dramatically in his time at Everton, but until this season, it looked like that one key ingredient for a striker, that finishing power, that sort of fox in the box nature, that poacher's instinct was lacking, and it was something that you feared couldn't be coached. But he's had a real breakthrough season, and considering they paid something in the region, was around $1 million, $1.5 million, possibly.
That was the deal all in, yeah. So I'm sure much of that has been triggered by now, yeah.
Yeah, for a player who'd not really played much first team football at all at Sheffield United. I remember doing a piece from his old manager in non-league days when he started out on loan there. So yeah, the way he's come all the way through now and has finally got us kind of not talking about replacing Romelu Lukaku for the best part of 2.5 years now. We're saying Everton must replace Lukaku. Well, finally, like I say, a slow burn. It looks like they've done that in house. So yeah, had to play the long game, but Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
Indeed, and a player whose arrival was driven by David Unsworth, but of course came in the Steve Walsh era. Adam, who would you rank as Steve Walsh's best signing for the football club?
I think I've got to go Idrissa Gueye. I just don't think there's any question. I think Everton is still missing him now. I think we've seen over the course of this season, especially in the last few weeks, we've seen the issues that we've had in midfield. I know injuries have played a big part in that, and we don't know whether Jean-Philippe Gbamin could have been the replacement that he was touted as being. But yeah, I just think Idrissa Gueye's influence in that midfield was just absolutely huge. We know how industrious he was and how energetic he was, and he was just an absolute nuisance for anybody trying to attack the Everton defence for a good number of years. But it was the second part of that 2018-19 season, I think that's where we really saw the best out of him. That's when we saw him add those more attacking sort of attributes to his game as well. I know he'd scored a couple of goals for us in his years previously, but I think that was when we really saw the best of him in an attacking sense, and he really gelled together with Andre Gomez in particular next to him. And I do just wonder what would have happened if we'd managed to keep hold of him in the summer. I know he had his heart set on a move to Paris Saint-Germain, so you can't blame the club or anything like that for letting him go or anything, and you obviously can't blame the club for his replacement getting injured 3 games into the season. But yeah, I just think we've missed him so much. He was one of the best bargains that we've had in the last probably 10 years, I'd say. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's no question for me, it's Gueye.
And of course, to answer your question there, Adam, what would we be doing if we still had him? Well, I think Carlo wouldn't be looking for a midfielder with energy, would he?
Yeah.
Because we would have the most energetic midfielder around. Sam, who do you think, anybody different that you think Steve Walsh deserves credit for?
Well, obviously Adam must have read the article because Idrissa Gueye got a 9 out of 10 in the rate. Yeah.
Sam Carroll 9, wow.
Sam Carroll 9, yeah. So, Bees took Calvert-Lewin as well, which obviously looking like a great piece of business. And another one, judging from the past 1 or 2 months since he's joined Fleetwood on loan. Obviously, Lewis Gibson arrived during the Steve Walsh year. That could look like a decent bit of business. So there's a few knocking about. You know what I mean? Jordan Pickford, I still think.
Yeah.
I think me and Preno defended Jordan a few times on this podcast. I still think he could become, or still should be, Everton and England's in number 1 for the long term if he can kind of cut out the concentration errors a little bit. So, the thing with Walsh is that at the risk of kind of getting a bit of stick for this, I think that his transfer business wasn't the worst ever. It was just that when he signed someone bad, they were really, really, really bad and usually quite expensive as well. But, there's a few names in there, isn't there? That just didn't work out. But we made a profit on Vlasic, we made a profit on Yakuru. A couple that were just strange signings, but not the worst. But then it's more when you start looking through and you kind of see your Balassis and your Sandros and Davy Klaassen, and then the jury's still out on a few, isn't it? You've got Michael Keane, you've got Gylfi Sigurdsson, and a few like that. So yeah, I'd probably at the moment go for Idrissa Gana Gueye. Still unbelievable that we signed him for 8 million, but in a couple of years we could be sat here talking about Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who, as you point out, was under the Walsh umbrella. So yeah.
Okay, let's flip that discussion on its head. Chris, who do you think has been the biggest disappointment in terms of signings that Mr. Walsh brought?
Yeah, there was two that immediately sprung to mind, but given their respective transfer fees, they're Sandro Ramirez and Davy Klaassen. But I'm going to say Klaassen, although at that particular time, and we said I've compared this before to Beatles songs, Lennon and McCartney. They've always got that joint authorship on them, which was Klaassen more actually a Koeman man, given his connections. So could you pin the blame, as it'd have to be blame, on Koeman? That just the price that he paid that Davy Klaassen, Ajax captain, came with a huge reputation, and it never really happened for him in English football. He just didn't seem to offer any particular strength. He didn't seem particularly quick. He didn't seem particularly strong. Obviously, he was a good passer of the ball. He just never seemed to fit in. And obviously, Everton had to take a huge loss on him after just the one season. Sandro, equally as disappointing, but of course, he came for much more of a modest fee, albeit with big wages.
Adam, what's your pick?
I'm going to go the other way, and I'm going to go Sandro, because I think while Davy Klaassen was undoubtedly really disappointing, we thought he was going to be this creative hub that we'd signed, even though we signed them along with 2 other attacking midfielders, which was a really interesting decision. We did, in fact, sell him on, and we managed to recoup some money for him, at least, if not, all of the quite large amount that we paid for him. Sandro Ramirez is still an Everton player, and he's still getting big amounts of money for no return whatsoever. His only goal that he scored was that consolation in the 5-1 against Atalanta. He's only scored a couple this season while he's been out on loan. I think he had, was it over a year of a goal drought? Yeah. That's just, for a striker, and for a striker who came to Goodison with so much promise as well. We kept getting told, this is going to be the bargain of the summer. Everton have got, one of the most exciting prospects in Spain. This kid's going to be brilliant, and that's everything we wanted to hear.
Isn't it?
But I mean, that's everything we wanted to hear, wasn't it? When Romelu Lukaku left, we were thinking to ourselves, yeah, we need maybe this young lad to, maybe settle in for the first season and then kick on, and then he could be this 20-goal a season man that we've been looking for so long. And it just didn't happen. It only took until January before he was out on loan. 2 other loan moves have followed, and none of them look like they're going to lead to a permanent move, just because of those astronomical wages we have to pay to get him in the first place. So I'd be majorly shocked if Everton managed to offload him before his contract ended up running out at the club, which is that's quite a mistake to make, to be honest. So yeah, I'm going to have to go with Sandro for mine.
Sam?
Yeah, I think obviously they're the 2 big ones, aren't they? Balassi probably up there for some as well, but that injury, I think, he actually hadn't had the worst first half of that season, and some exciting performance at the start as well. So, but for me, I just think Davy Klaassen, one of the worst, probably the worst player I've ever seen play for Everton. He was
right. That's nonsense. He can't be the worst.
He was built like a child. And I'll remember that time he lost the ball against Moussa Sissoko against Tottenham at Goodison when we lost 3-0. And he just lay on the floor with his head in the turf. And I remember just saying to my dad, that's it. He's done, because he knew he couldn't play at this level. And we managed. I think what is remarkable, whether it was Walsh or Koeman, that they managed to go to that Ajax United Europa League final and see all that talent on display, and see Davinson Sanchez and go, that 4-foot ball 22-year-old playing centre mid. is the one we should go and sign. So
Seriously, like, jokes aside, Sam, it was interesting because I watched. Like, I'm sure all of us, or many of us, and many people listening, did watch that final, and it was very clear by that point that we were already well in the market for Davy Klaassen, and it was pretty much almost a done deal. Do you think many of us, and I would probably be guilty of this, chose to ignore what we saw that night?
I think so, because I think as well that's one of the reasons Klaassen kind of stings a little bit, because, you know, I know it can catch it out with any football these days, but for me it was the, you know, signing the Ajax captain, this goal scored midfielder, you know, all the statistics, and, you know, I know people on Twitter love to throw stats and graphs and XG and stuff around, but everything kind of painted this great player, this gem from Holland. You know, he was a leader. He popped up. He scored goals. He was loved by the Ajax fans. He'd dragged Ajax to, you know, quite unexpected for Ajax to get to the Europa League final. You know, a bit of, you know, the captain of this exciting new young team. And as you're saying, Phil, I think we watched that Europa League final, and I don't really remember Klaassen touching the ball, and that was probably what he was guilty of during his time at Everton as well. He was an anonymous performer, and but that day when we signed him, it was just so exciting. I think, yeah, we probably did ignore the fact that, you know, obviously you can't judge a player off one game, and what a massive game it was as well against a Jose Mourinho, you know, master of finals, Manchester United side. So it was difficult, but for me, Klaassen out of all Walsh's signs, difficult to stomach, because it did just, he almost seemed like a guarantee. I know it was over 20 million. I know he's coming from a foreign league, but he just seemed to have something that was going to translate to the English game, seemed to pop up in the right positions, a bit of a modern Tim Cahill at Everton, and, you know, we took a massive loss on him. But I also understand where Adam's coming from as well, that when you factor in Sandro's wages and the fact that we're probably going to have to just try and find another loan move for him and hope that he catches fire in terms of his form somewhere else, then, you know, it's difficult with them too, isn't it, to kind of defend Walsh's business. But yeah, I think Davy's done all right at Werder Bremen as well. He was a nice guy, and from what we heard and seen, he was professional as well. He never kicked threw his toys out the pram or kicked off at Everton, so I'll always respect Davy for that. But he just wasn't cut out for the Premier League, and hopefully we now under Marcel we've moved away from those kinds of transfers.
Chris, just going back to Idrissa Gueye, you know, as you mentioned, I think we talk seemingly forever have talked about struggling to replace Romelu Lukaku. Is it becoming increasingly apparent that so far we haven't replaced Gueye? And second question to that, how difficult do you think that task is this summer?
Well, as they would have probably envisaged, Jean-Philippe Gamamin was the player to replace Idrissa Gueye. Obviously, a very different man physically, a much more, you know, just a bigger unit, for want of a better word. Idrissa Gueye was very tough, but obviously a very small man, whereas Gbamin is also, you know, a physical presence who could also play centre-back, I believe. Well, I remember speaking to a German journalist when he signed, saying it's almost like he's three players in one. Sadly, we've not seen any of those players, unfortunately, yet. So he would be the one. But what we do have now is a totally different dynamic, whereas for the best part of the last few years, Everton typically play in the 4-2-3-1 stroke 4-3-3, either way, in that the midfield's setting out a certain way, whereas at the moment, Carlo's been playing that 4-4-2, so it's a different kind of dynamic. I don't know whether going forward that's the way that Carlo wants to do it, but it's who's going to fit into the way Ancelotti wants to have the midfield. Fabian Delph was another defensive-minded midfielder who, you know, I remember people at the club really crowing about his signing in the first few weeks of the season, but it's not quite happened for him. You know, been in and out with the injuries and loss of form, and quite disappointingly, loss of discipline at times, which is something that we didn't expect from him. We more, you know, almost saw him as this experienced model pro, the steady hand there. So yeah, there's certainly some big questions to be answered in regards to that for next season. Just who does fill Gueye's boots, and just what sort of midfielder that's going to end up being.
Absolutely, something for us to explore and write about and talk about in the coming days and weeks. And or forever how long this gap goes on. Chaps, thank you very much for joining me from various points in the Merseyside / Wirral region. It's been a pleasure to see your faces for the first time in a week.
Yeah, various points of the flat for Sam and Adam.
Indeed,
yeah.
yes.
Me and Sam have had to quarantine ourselves in different rooms.
I was
I can't stand the sight of them.
I was very on brand for this whole podcast by doing it from bed with me.
Very good. So no, thanks for joining us, chaps. Your opinions and insight, excellent as always. We will do this again at some point next week. And thank you very much for listening. And just a plea to the people who are listening: get your questions into us across the usual channels on Facebook, on Twitter. You know, we're all online. Get your questions into us, and we will do special pods on listener questions in the coming weeks. Hopefully, try and do one early next week. So if you remember, get your questions in on any topics you want discussing, and we'll form the podcast around them. So thank you very much for listening, chaps. Thank you very much. We're all off to wash our hands thoroughly, and this has been the Royal Blue Podcast.